This final segment is about the reassembly of the engine. During this process, we'll make a number of additional checks and measurements. In general, the reassembly process should be the reverse order of the disassembly. We're only going to cover the key points in the reassembly where special attention is required. I recommend coating engine components during reassembly with the same oil used in the engine. O-rings should be coated with grease. Kubota recommends 3-bond liquid gasket as a gasket sealer. It's not necessary to use any other special assembly oil or sealer. Thoroughly clean all mating surfaces before attaching gaskets in the 3-bond. Run a mill file across the surface to remove any old gasket material or varnish. If the surfaces aren't cleaned properly, the gasket may not seal completely, and oil will leak from the engine. Now, in addition to polluting the environment, that's a sure sign to your customer of an unprofessional overhaul job. The first task in reassembly is to replace all bushings and bearings in the block or in components that don't meet specifications. Some pistons have an arrow to show which way they go in. Others will have to be marked. Some engines have pistons in the center bores that are different from those in the outer bores. Be sure to look carefully for these marks and install the correct piston in each bore. Reattach the pistons to the connecting rods. Be careful to align the numbers on the rod to the fuel injection side of the engine and the marks on the piston to the front. There's only one easy way to put these assemblies back together. Place the wrist pins in the refrigerator several hours before reassembly. Then heat the pistons in engine oil to 176 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes. The cold pins will slide very easily into the heated pistons. Just put the snap rings on both ends to secure things. If you try to force the pin into the piston without this procedure, you may destroy the piston. Then, using the plastic gauge as instructed in your manuals, install the correct bearing cases on the crankshaft with the flywheel marked to the rear. Make sure the bearing journals are clean and free of oil. If oil is left on the bearing journals, it'll invalidate the results of the plastic gauge test. Apply the correct torque to the bearing case bolt 1. The correct torque is important to prevent stretching the bolt and causing a failure. Then remove each case and check the oil clearance. All clearances must be within specifications. Plastic gauge is an important tool in a quality engine overhaul. I urge you to learn how to use it properly. Instructions can be found in the reference manual. Each main bearing in a Kubota engine is different. They're not interchangeable. Make sure you replace them in the proper sequence. The rear of the bearing will have markings. Some engines will have the word flywheel, and some will have a Japanese symbol to show the proper orientation. The markings must face the flywheel side of the engine. Clean off the plastic gauge and reinstall the bearing cases with the thrust bearing grooves facing out. Then torque the bolts. Now you can put the crankshaft back into the block and, using a drift pin, align the holes on the bearing cases with the hole in the block. Align the rear main bearing as you see here. Then insert the correct length bolt coated with oil into each hole and tighten them to finger tightness. Install the bearing case cover with the mark up after applying grease to the seal. Tighten each bolt in sequence, diagonally, with even force. Then torque them. Torque all bearing case bolt 2s to the proper spec. After rotating the engine and covering the cylinders with a rag to keep out dirt, Recheck the end play of the crankshaft to make sure that the side metal or thrust washers are within specifications. Reinstall the bearing, spacer, and fork levers to the fuel injection area. Then attach the governor springs, the cover coated with sealant, and the start spring. Be careful to align the right side of the fuel limit bolt to fork lever 2 as shown. Next, we'll deal with the front gear case side of the engine in the reverse sequence from the disassembly. Reinstall all the other gears, making sure of the proper part sequence. Align all timing marks on the gears by installing the idler gear last. You should be aware that timing gears only line up after many rotations of the engine. Remember, the front gear case sides on other Kubota engines are different. On these models, the oil pump attaches to the block, and there's one less gear and shaft. These engines use an oil slinger system to lubricate the front gears. This system must be properly reassembled. First, install the oil slinger, then the O-ring. To prevent damage to the seal, the spacer is coated with grease and installed on the crankshaft gear after the front cover is attached. The next step is to rotate the engine so the rear end is up. Then install the flywheel. Coat the bolts with oil, install the stopper, and torque the bolts. Then install the starter. The Super 5 Series have a dowel pin in the crankshaft to help with reassembly of the flywheel. Other Kubota engines don't have this pin, which lines up the flywheel with the bolt holes on the crankshaft. If you're working on another model, the following method will work well for you. With the timing gears on the front of the engine all aligned, place the flywheel on the crankshaft, align the TDC mark on the flywheel with the timing mark on the housing. Now you're ready to insert the pistons. Coat each piston with engine oil and align the marks on the rod and the piston. Follow the instructions in the workshop manual and place the gap of compression ring 1 on the opposite side of the combustion chamber. Stagger the compression ring 2 and the oil ring, making a right angle from the gap of compression ring 1. Using a ring compressor, insert each piston into the correct cylinder. After checking oil clearance with plastic gauge, clean the bearing surfaces, then reinstall and torque the rods. Be careful to match the numbers on the rods and the rod caps. Using a new O-ring coated with grease, reinstall the oil pickup strainer. Then apply liquid gasket to both sides of the gasket and reassemble the oil pan. The injection pump is next. Line up the grooves in the fork levers to match the grooves in the block. Apply sealer to the injection pump shim surface. Line up the rack pin with the groove and install the pump. Make sure you use the same number of shims as were removed originally. Then attach the governor springs to the forks. Apply sealer to the gasket. Attach the springs to the cover and reinstall it. Now you can install the stop solenoid. The timing should be the same, unless new components were installed. If you need to check the timing, follow the instructions in the workshop and reference manuals. Other models of Kubota engines go together in a similar sequence. The start spring is located here, and the speed control plate and governor springs are here. Apply a small amount of grease to the O-rings and oil seal, then put sealer material on the gasket. Put the O-ring on the crankshaft and install the front cover. Then put the spacer on the crankshaft. Attach the flywheel stopper and torque the vibration dampener. You should also use new gaskets coated with sealer to reattach the lift pump and the water pump. When that's completed, line up the hour meter shaft with the groove in the camshaft, apply sealer to the gasket, and install the hour meter. The next step is to install the valve lifters into their original positions. Then, put on a new head gasket, a new blue O-ring, and install the cylinder head. The bolts should be coated with oil. Using the sequence in the workshop manual, torque the cylinder head to specs. Then, install the glow plugs, the water return pipe and hose, and the intake manifold. Now you can install the push rods and valve caps and the rocker arm. Loosen all tappet adjustments. Then check to see that all the push rods are properly engaged in the grooves of the rocker arm. Tighten the rocker arm bolts evenly until they're seated correctly, then torque them to the correct value. Following the workshop manual sequence, adjust the valves. Finally, using a new gasket coated with grease, install the valve cover. Some Kubota engines are equipped with a decompression device on the valve cover. This device opens the exhaust a small amount to allow the engine to spin faster in cold weather or when the battery is low. This decompression device must be adjusted each time the valve cover is removed. See the workshop and reference manuals for the correct procedure. The injection nozzles can be installed now. Make sure you use new copper sealing washers. Torque the nozzles to spec, attach the return lines and the injection high pressure lines.